you for watching today's mandated reporting webinar. This will be a 1-hour example so everyone can kind of see it start to finish how we do it. I'm going to give you just kind of the handouts I normally give out, and then I'm going to run through it as if you guys are the participants and I'm the presenter. So we'll do all the interactive pieces. You can type in the chat box below, so anything like that. And you can watch this as many times as you want, or if you're not doing a training for a while, you can always pull this video back up. It will be on Dropbox, and watch it again before you give an actual presentation. So what have I have prepared for today? So I have a sign-in sheet if you would like one. So this is just to keep track of who attended. Here is the mandated reporter training evaluation. This is required for all of your trainings. Make sure that you print one out for every one of the people that are going to be attending, or you have extra just in case. You can do this yourself, or you can ask the organization to print these out for you. And if you want to fill this out a little bit in advance, and just go ahead and type in the date and type in the name of the training and then print it off, you can do that as well, just to keep it a little bit more organized. Also, I try and give these out for every presentation I do, or I have the organization printed out, or at the very least I email it to them so they have it on file if they have any questions. So this is Appendix A from the training manual, and this one's really good because it has all the types of abuse. It reiterates the indicators, both physical and behavioral. It has a little bit more information on handling disclosures. We think that one's really important as well, especially for mandated reporters. And then it just reiterates how you can make a report to DFACS and some extra resources at the bottom. Sometimes I like to print out Appendix I, which is questions to expect when making a CPS referral. This just gives them an idea of what they need to be looking for and what they need to include in the report. So here are some questions, and that's good for the organization to have on file. And then here's the actual document that they can fill out and email in. So I'll go through all of that in my presentation. And for today, I'm just going to be showing the, in brief, the Science on Neglect video. Typically, when I have a shorter training that's 1 hour, I only show this one video, but you can easily substitute that out for any of the videos you think are more relevant for your audience. Also, there are certificates in the Dropbox if anyone is requesting just certificates of attendance or anything like that. And of course, you would fill out this before you went in, your training name, organization, venue, date. You would also go through the PowerPoint to see if you wanted to include or take out any of the optional slides, and then also to go through it to see if you wanted to include any of the supplemental materials or the supplemental slides that we have in the PowerPoint as well. So going through the PowerPoint beforehand and making sure that you have what you think is best for your audience and for the length that they have as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, just acting like you guys are the participants and we're going through a 1-hour training. Thank you guys for joining me today, and we're going to talk about your role as a mandated reporter. During this training, I'll help you learn not only how to fulfill your legal obligations, but to advocate on the behalf of children so that we can prevent further abuse. So I am Jill Walsh. I am from Prevent Child Abuse Georgia. We're housed in the School of Public Health at Georgia State University. And we do a lot of trainings for professionals and different kind of educational materials as well. The ultimate goal of today's training is to discuss how your programs, organizations, communities, and you as an individual can protect children, ensuring all mandated reporters and anyone involved with children or families understands your organization's reporting protocol, knows how to make a report of abuse, and can recognize the signs of maltreatment. While there is a legal obligation to report suspected abuse and neglect, we feel that we also have a moral responsibility to prevent it whenever possible. Ideally, mandated reporting is the early recognition of child maltreatment. Your report may be the smoking gun that the agency needs to help a child or provide more resources to the family. Through discussion and scenarios, you'll see that identifying immediate danger may be clear, but other forms of maltreatment like neglect may leave a mandated reporter questioning whether to report. So now I'm going to ask you guys, what are some barriers to reporting suspected maltreatment that maybe you have felt personally, professionally, or other people you interact with have felt as well? So if you can type in the box below. And I see some people are typing. Falsely accusing a parent. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of fear around making that report, if it's accurate, if you're going to hurt the professional-parent relationship. Also, a lot of people think that if something were really going on, someone else would have already made the report. Someone else probably knows more than you. So all of those things as well, and just being inaccurate, will it make it worse for the child? So all of these are kind of valid fears that we have, but remember that we need to be advocating on the behalf of the child and not worry about anything else. We are requesting a service to be done to ensure the safety of the child and hopefully provide more resources to that family as well. So that's what the mindset we need to be in when we're making that call to DFACS. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about prevention. And I think a lot of people confuse the different types of prevention. It is a continuum. So it goes anywhere from pre-intervention to post-intervention, so meaning before the abuse ever happens, all the way to getting treatment for it. Even in our title of our organization, Prevent Child Abuse Georgia, when I say that I work for Prevent Child Abuse Georgia, people are like, oh, the poor children, and they get the image of hurt children and neglected children in their mind. I'm like, yeah, we do a little bit with that, but really prevention means we're stopping it from ever happening. It's a good thing. So we always want to make sure that people know what prevention looks like for child abuse and maltreatment. So primary prevention. Can anyone give me some examples of primary prevention in the state of Georgia? So sexual abuse program, and then we have stewards of children. Parent education is a great one. So primary prevention can include parent education, community support, and then we also have specific programs like Stewards of Children, which is a sexual abuse prevention program, Strengthening Family, which focuses on 5 protective factors. We also have home visiting. And then primary prevention, it can be a lot of bigger policies that we have that are more public health related as well. Secondary prevention can be making that mandated report of abuse. So abuse has already happened, but we want to stop it from further occurring to avoid suffering on the child's behalf, as well as reduce the adverse consequences of maltreatment. So just like the early treatment of an illness, and that can help reduce the duration or intensity of sickness, preventing further abuse can significantly impact the life of a child. I know many of us, as soon as we think we're getting sick, we go straight for the vitamin C or airborne, and we're doing that really as a secondary prevention method to prevent it from getting worse. Tertiary prevention includes treatment services to decrease the long-term and often complex effects of child maltreatment. These would include mental and behavioral health therapies, and a lot of those can be provided at child advocacy centers throughout Georgia, or at least referred by child advocacy centers of Georgia. So we just talked about prevention, but why is it so important? Well, we have the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, known as ACEs, and this has clearly shown a link between traumatic experiences, including child maltreatment, and poor health outcomes in adulthood. So children exposed to more ACEs, and ACEs can also include abuse, neglect, family violence, parent divorce, and substance abuse. They're at a higher risk of chronic disease and mental health issues throughout adulthood. So now let's look at the bigger picture and some statistics from the nation in Georgia. In 2014, there are approximately 700,000 substantiated cases of child maltreatment in the U.S. So child maltreatment, and I just want to let you guys know that it refers both to child abuse, neglect, and any type of abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. So maltreatment is kind of the umbrella term that I'm going to be using today. So in Georgia, reports of maltreatment were received for over 130,000 children. So those were just reports. Out of those, 22,000 were substantiated accounts of maltreatment. So we have right over 100,000 children that didn't have a substantiated report of abuse, but someone was concerned enough to call DFACS about. We like to think that's a huge opportunity for prevention in our state. So these over 100,000 children, to keep them out of the system or to give them resources so that we don't have to have DFACS intervention there. So I also wanted to point out that Georgia is currently ranked 42nd overall in the nation for child well-being. So those are based on Kids Count data. So many factors such as percent of children living in poverty, maltreatment rates, children attending pre-K, and more go into this ranking. So if you want to find out specific rankings for your county, they have a lot of county level data. You can go to www.kidscount.org and find information on your county on a lot of different indicators. And these can be great for points of intervention or other things like that. So over the past 6 years, there have been slight drops in child physical and sexual abuse. However, neglect has declined very little. As we will learn, there are many factors that play a role in child maltreatment, one of which is that over 16 million children living in poverty across the U.S. And in 2014, 26% of children living in Georgia were living below the federal poverty level. So this pyramid represents only substantiated cases, and we'll get into a little bit more about these reports in the future. And I also wanted to point out that poverty does not equate maltreatment, but it does create some scenarios where it might be more prevalent. So it creates lack of resources, families in frequent crisis, and it also can increase the parental stress level, which we know can affect maltreatment rates as well. So we can see here that 70% of maltreatment-related child deaths are in children under 3 years old. Why do we think that children under 3 are more vulnerable? So if you can write it in that text box. Okay, so they can't communicate or verbalize. They can't tell anyone. They're always around their parent, and they're not exposed to others, often correct. So a 5-year-old is probably going to kindergarten every day, so they're having other eyes on them every day, versus an infant, which is only around their parents maybe and doesn't get seen as often. So young children are especially vulnerable because no one sees them. They can't communicate if something's wrong. They're physically more fragile. Young children have no defense, and it's often an increased period of parental frustration. We know the period of purple crying where they just cry uncontrollably. So this is a very stressful time for parents as well. I also wanted to point out that on average in Georgia, 3 children die from unsafe sleep environments a week. Unsafe sleep environments include babies placed in the wrong position, placing pillows or extra blankets in the crib, and bed sharing. So we wanted to encourage everyone to get the word out about safe sleeping, and there's a lot of great information out there on the National Safe to Sleep campaign and even in Georgia, because 3 children a week are dying in Georgia because of this. Some other statistics about abuse include 80% of perpetrators are the child's biological parents. Right after that, we see secondary caregivers, so a lot of boyfriends and girlfriends that aren't the biological parent, but are taking the role on as caregiver, and that's because they might not have as much parent education or be around the child as much to know what's normal or what's normal discipline methods as well. And the majority of the abuse takes place inside the home. So some parental and family factors to consider, and none of these mean maltreatment is there, but they are really good indicators, especially when combined. And these are some things that we can look forward to include on our report to DFACS as well if we kind of note any of these. So parental and caregiver immaturity and kind of unrealistic expectations really go hand in hand to me. So if you're not really educated on developmental stages or anything like that, you don't know what to expect from your child. So you might be disciplining harshly for something that you shouldn't even be expecting the child to be able to do at that age. Social isolation, so you don't have a lot of support or family around you to help, that can increase frustration as well. unmet emotional needs, parents who are not relating well to other adults might turn to their child to satisfy their need for love, acceptance, and self-esteem. So as I mentioned, frequent crisis, whether this is financial, job, marital, legal stresses, major illnesses, any of those as well. Poor childhood experiences. So many abusive adults were mistreated as children and might not have learned or developed the ability to relate to children in an appropriate, nonviolent manner. So even things that I can relate to growing up, I always used to hear my mom say things. I'm like, oh, I'm never going to be like my mom, never going to say that. And the more I grow up, the more I hear things, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I sound just like my mom. So even if it's not a conscious decision, these things are embedded in us early on. And then also poor family boundaries and dangerous home environment. So failure to protecting a child from harm can include unlimited access to home by outsiders, which is a huge thing for sexual abuse as well, access to medication, dangerous objects, lack of adequate supervision, and it can also just be toxic substances in the household. And then one other thing, mental illness and drug and abuse problems. So we know that parents with mental illnesses can be great and amazing parents. Sometimes they just need more accountability with treatment or checking up on as well. It is not just the number of maltreated children that should really be of great concern. Young children are the most vulnerable to the experienced maltreatment and also the most vulnerable to the effects of maltreatment. Experiences that shape early brain development are crucial for healthy outcomes. So exposure to strong, frequent, or prolonged stress without adult support can disrupt the development of healthy networks of the brain connections in young children. So there's a lot of research on toxic stress lately. So here we see poor little parent-child interaction. So they're not getting the vocabulary skills they need. And so at school, they're really not ready for school or performing at the same level of other children. Also, there might be neglect or parents' inability to get the child to school. So all of these can increase school absentee, and less likely to graduate, decrease in job productivity. So we can see it's just a slew of onsets, especially if they have behavior problems. Children who aren't performing at the same level of other children, are they going to want to pay attention in school? Or are they going to be doing other things and engaging in other activities and probably be a disruption to the class? We also see in children learned violent behaviors. So how they interact with others may become violent or hostile. Decrease in mental health, and a lot of these can lead to involvement in criminal activity. There's a huge overlap in these two things. And they can all lead to poor health outcomes in adults as well. So we can see the many things that child maltreatment can produce. So the estimated annual cost of child maltreatment and neglect in Georgia ranges from $2 to $3 billion. And the majority of these costs are associated with productivity losses, child welfare costs, criminal justice costs, and special education costs. And I also wanted to point out that the total lifetime economic burden resulting from new cases of fatal and non-fatal child maltreatment in the United States, and these are cases of child maltreatment just from 2008, will be $124 billion throughout their lifetime. So now we're going to talk about recognizing child maltreatment, and I wanted to just encourage your participation. Your insights and experiences from having worked with families are really invaluable to us in the room to help get a realistic picture of what you guys have going on in your organization or specific things we can discuss about populations you work with. So we're about to go into some Georgia laws on child abuse and neglect. In Georgia, abuse includes physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse or sexual exploitation, prenatal abuse, or the commission of an act of family violence as defined in the Georgia law in the presence of a child. So presence means physically present or able to hear. In Georgia, the law is very intentional to exclude physical forms of discipline. So that does not say that physical forms of discipline are considered abuse. So that means that corporal punishment is allowed, but there are limits. So corporal punishment that leaves marks or physical injuries, such as bruises, is not legal. If you're concerned about physical markings, punishments that seem excessive, or you suspect abuse, please report that to DFACS immediately. So corporal punishment is allowed, physical injuries to the child are not. Under Georgia law, which deals with mandated reporters, child abuse is defined slightly differently. So Georgia really has 3 laws for child maltreatment. So this one includes physical injury or death, but physical abuse as well, neglect or exploitation of the child. This definition also includes endangering a child, which I'll go over in a second, and includes sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. So I wanted to go back to endangering a child. This is new to the Georgia Code. This specifically includes when a person intentionally allows a child under the age of 18 to witness a forcible felony, battery, or family violence battery, or the person has knowledge that a child has witnessed or seen these things. Any person who intentionally causes or permits a child to be present where any person is manufacturing meth, driving under the influence with a child in a vehicle, and prenatal abuse. So these things seem pretty obvious, but now the Georgia Code for Mandated Reporters specifically outlines it for us. And I just wanted to reiterate that you all have handouts today. So I'm going to go into the 4 different types of abuse, give some physical indicators and behavioral indicators as well. Some of them I might skim over a little bit more, but I wanted to refer you back to your handout. So here on the handout, the first couple pages reiterate all of this for you. So it has physical abuse, and then it also has physical indicators, behavioral indicators, neglect, and physical and behavioral indicators, and it also has sexual and emotional abuse as well. So you guys have all of these that you're going to refer back to, and I would keep these handy so that when you're making a report of abuse, you can see something or write those indicators in there that you have seen, or you might use this as prior concerns about behavior that you've witnessed from the child. So while injuries can occur accidentally, when a child is at play, physical abuse may be suspected if the explanations do not fit the injury or if the pattern of frequency is apparent. So physical abuse can teach a child to be submissive, fearful, or aggressive. It also teaches them that hitting is a way to control others and solve problems. So this can be reflected in the child's ability to handle stressful situations and how they interact with other child or authority figures. And so here we can see behavioral indicators as being, they might feel shame, deserving of punishment, weary of physical contact, frightened to go home, or frightened of the parent, especially if they've just received a bad grade or something like that. Self-destructive behaviors, and wearing of inappropriate clothing during for weather, so covering up in the hot summertime. And I will give this one caveat, especially for children with intellectual or other disabilities. Sometimes they dress in a way that feels secure to them, and it might have no relation to physical abuse or anything like that. So knowing what is normal and appropriate for that child is important to knowing what typical versus atypical behavior is. So physical indicators, unexplained bruises or welts, burns, fractures, dislocations, and even bald patches on the scalp. The presence of many injuries in various stages of healing makes it obvious that the injuries did not occur at one time, and I feel like it's a bigger indicator that the injury was not an accident. Physical indicators of abuse include bruises, lacerations, swollen areas, marks especially on the child's face, head, back, chest, genital area, buttocks, or thighs. So when we think of what's typical behavior for a child, you know, sports, running, tumbling over, children usually get bruises on the outside of their bodies, so where they're most likely to bump up against things. But children don't as often get bruising like on the inner parts of their arms, the inner thighs, places like that. You don't usually bruise from sports or different activities as often. So other wounds like human bite marks, cigarette burns, broken bones, puncture marks, or missing hair may indicate abuse. And for broken bones, it might not be as obvious. Some of them might be slight fractures that are healing. So it might look like a bruise that just kind of doesn't go away and the soreness doesn't go away. We need to be looking at these injuries that are not attended as well. A child's behavior might also signal something is wrong, like I mentioned in the previous slide. So victims that are of physical abuse may display withdrawn or aggressive, behavioral extremes, self-destructive, complain of soreness. They might be in discomfort when they move and different things like that. Inflicted burns are more uniform in depth, and they are usually located on the buttocks, perineum, or extremities. Immersion burns into hot water or other liquid are almost always non-accidental or considered abuse, so they kind of look like gloves or socks. These may be seen on the child's hands, feet, or buttocks. These types of abuse usually associate with potty training and the child soiling their clothes. If burns are caused by water, coffee, tea, soup, or any liquid, splash marks typically indicate accidental burns. So we can see that image to the lower right. So when a child is getting into more things, they have a little bit more reach, they might spill something on themselves, splash something on themselves. So we need to be making sure that parents are pushing dangerous materials back or out of reach at that point. But accidental burns look more like splashes, and then the one on the far right is a dip. So that one's more of a severe punishment for dip. And it's really sad to say, but we do see physical injuries inflicted on child like this. So that's why we're going over it today. So many children are victims of shaken baby syndrome, and they don't show warning signs usually from 12 to 24 hours until after the incident. So a parent may bring their child into the hospital thinking it's an illness or saying their infant fell off the bed or the couch. So we need to be aware that shaken baby syndrome is typically seen in young infants or children who cannot roll over, and the injuries are not consistent with the falling story or their distance they were supposed to fall. And we see a lot of shaken baby syndrome in secondary caregivers who aren't as accustomed to the infant's uncontrollable crying or having that level of frustration of the infant. So they get frustrated and they shake the infant not knowing how dangerous it is. Infants, next we know, really don't have the muscle developed, so it is a huge shaking to their head. So letting every caregiver know appropriate and inappropriate ways to deal with children's crying. The way that the Period of Purple teaches is that to leave them in a safe sleep environment and to walk away for a couple minutes and calm down. So as long as all of their needs are met and they're still in control of the crying, it's okay to leave them in a crib on their back alone for short periods of time while you calm down, or call a friend for support. So prenatal abuse, this is included as a reportable form of abuse under child endangerment. Reports should include any type of substance abuse, medical report diagnosis, mother's ability to protect the infant, and other household information. So this can also include if there is a mother taking a young child into a daycare and she is pregnant and you see or suspect her drinking or other things like that. So that's also endangering the child, the fetus as well. So important points to remember for physical abuse: those who don't cruise rarely bruise, and this is in reference to the idea that immobile infants should not experience a great deal of bruising. Accidents involving immobile infants do occur, but when there's an inconsistent story or the bruises are in various stages of healing, there may be a problem. So it's important to understand also in this section the difference between corporal punishment and physical abuse. Corporal punishment is legal, but physical abuse is not. So physical abuse is when there is a physical injury to the child. So that's kind of where we use the line in this one. And we also wanted to list some professionals that are permitted to take photos of a child's injury without parental permission. So this is a newer code, and really I think there were just a lot of people taking pictures, and there was concern over who was taking pictures of children without permission. So this law now outlines who specifically is protected under the law and is able to take pictures of the children without parental consent. So here we see hospital employees or volunteers, law enforcement, school officials, and if it is a school official, I would say always send them to the nurse if you have a nurse on staff, or the school counselor, or other employees or volunteers of child protective agencies. So neglect. So typically about 80% of reported cases of child maltreatment include neglect. It is also harder to prevent due to the complex social, cultural, and economic ties. Neglect is also responsible for negatively impacting a child's brain development and affect the educational achievement, lifelong health, and successful parenting of the next generation. So neglect is a continuum, and often reporters hesitate or are unsure whether to report neglectful situations. So where is the line and where crosses over that line to a reportable situation? We always want to be considering the age of the child and the caregiver's capacity of the child. So children 0 through 6 years old are the most vulnerable, especially in neglect cases. While some situations or decisions caregivers make are not what we would have for our own children, that also does not mean that they are reportable. So ultimately, you don't need the burden of proof for neglect or any type of abuse. If you feel something is going on that compromises the safety or well-being of that child, you need to go ahead and make the report to DFACS. So here is the exact definition according to Georgia Code, but it can also include failure for the parent or caregivers to provide a child with the basic needs such as food, clothing, shelter, safety, educational care. It does say that gunshot, so infliction of bodily harm to a child with firearm due to a caregiver's failure to secure the weapon in a manner that it makes it accessible to the child would be considered neglect and failure to protect. So failure to protect the child from present or impending dangers. So sometimes sexual abuse falls into this category because parents or caretakers' lack of supervision put them in the situation where sexual abuse occurred, or they allow unlimited access by kind of people coming in and out of the house that puts the child in danger. Failure to provide nutrients and affection, and also living arrangements, as I just said, that threaten the child's health, such as exposure to dangerous items or allowing a lot of people in and out. This also includes unsafe structures or exposure to bitter weather. So if the utilities are turned on and off, and that doesn't mean that they're a bad parent, that they don't love their child. It just means that they don't have the resources currently to make sure that that child is safe. So helping them with resources, and then also sometimes making that report to DFACS to ensure that those actions are followed through on. So now I'm going to show this video that works on the webinar, and this is the video that I typically like to show in here.
Everyone in a community has a vested interest in everyone else's children, because everyone else's children determine the next adult population that makes for a successful society. Built into our biology is the need to have responsive interactions with adults.
Neglect for children is when they don't get what the brain is expecting to get, what the child is expecting to get, what we are biologically prepared and waiting for, which is input from those around us.
It's this back and forth serve and return interaction that literally shapes the architecture of the brain.
Serve and return begins when a child looks at something or observes something, makes an utterance, and that represents the serve. And the return is when the parent notices the child doing these things and responds to the child.
Under conditions where serve and return is broken, you literally are pulling away what is the essential ingredient of the development of human brain architecture.
It was a really compelling series of experiments where they started by videotaping the mother and the baby engaging in cooing and smiling. And then they asked the mother to basically put on a blank face and not respond at all.
When a baby is not attended to, that is a sign of danger to the baby biologically. So the stress system has become activated.
In a brain that is constantly bathed in stress hormones, not that's up and down, that comes with normal development. Certain key synapses, the connections between nerves, fail to form, and critical regions of the brain.
So neglect both fails to provide the stimulation that's needed to develop the basic architecture, and when it's at a certain level, is one of the most potent activators of the stress biology of a young child. So you get a double whammy.
Science points to four categories of the spectrum of neglect. The first category would be what's called occasional inattention, where children experience responsiveness most of the time, but occasionally adults don't respond. There's no harm in that, and in fact, there's probably some benefit.
A child can learn to self-soothe and explore the environment, and all of those opportunities build brain architecture.
The second category, scientists would call chronic understimulation, is where on a regular basis, children have less interaction with the adults around them than is needed for healthy development.
Those children typically, when provided with enriched learning opportunities and more typical levels of serve and return, will show catch-up.
The third category is what science would call severe neglect in a family where not only are there prolonged periods of inattention and lack of responsiveness, but often also associated with not being fed enough, not being bathed enough, not having basic needs met.
Neglect is a huge problem in the U.S. Children are much more likely to be neglected than they are to experience any other kind of maltreatment.
We see the child really being at risk for much more substantial kinds of deficits down the road that don't necessarily get easily fixed or ameliorated. This is where we really need to think about more complicated and often more intensive strategies to help undo those effects.
The fourth category, called severe neglect, generally found in institutional settings, is a result of children living in kind of warehoused type situation in orphanages.
And it doesn't have to even be as extreme as orphanages. It can be experiences that are regretfully occurring in many, many parts of our country.
Often institutional care in this country is under the euphemistic name of transitional care or temporary care or assessment facilities.
If you think about what institutional or residential care would look like for an infant, where there's somebody new coming onto the shift every 8 hours, it really alters the development of the child's brain architecture and other aspects of the child's development.
We have the potential to change children's developmental trajectories.
Interventions can apply to parents, to foster parents or adoptive parents, child care settings, Head Start settings, and other kinds of settings. And really, what they're about is attuning people to the serve and return process.
Neglecting young...
I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. There's about another minute left of the video. So making sure that where you're going to be training at has Wi-Fi available, and if not, I mean, the videos are really just supplementary and extra to add in there to, you know, make it more interactive or not just having someone speak the whole time. So I think that one does a really good job of presenting not neglect in a physical sense where we see food, shelter, not taking them to school, other things like that, but neglect in the sense of how infants' brains are developing and their future trajectory in life. So here we're going to go over the different types of neglect. Supervision is just so paramount for young children. Different types of supervisory neglect include the child being left alone, left with an inadequate caregiver, a caregiver is home but not watching the child closely enough. Children whose parents use drugs or have mental illnesses are also more likely to be left home alone or inadequately supervised. Often we see a lot of older siblings taking care of younger siblings, and depending on the ages of both children, this could be considered inadequate supervision. So let's say an 8-year-old is acting as a primary caregiver for a younger sibling like a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old. Is that younger sibling getting all the meaningful interactions or exposures to language needed? Is there a set bedtime or anyone helping them get ready for school in the morning? Who's monitoring their television or TV use? And who's making sure that they're not getting into hazardous materials at home? Even though that 8-year-old can be great and helpful and really good with the child, they're not the best caregiver for that child for them to get all the supervision and really brain development that they need. One of the most saddest cases I think that I read from a child fatality review was an older sibling giving a 1 or 2-year-old a bath, and they walked out of the room for just a couple minutes. They saw a cartoon they liked, and the infant drowned while the older child was out. So they're just not cognitively able to make those decisions and interactions with a younger child that an adult can do. So that's a big burden to put on the older child. Also, inadequate supervision can be failing to protect a child from a third party or allowing the child to be involved in harmful activities that can result in physical or sexual abuse. Much sexual abuse goes untabulated because it's classified in their inadequate supervision on the parent's behalf. So medical neglect, I just wanted to clarify this where religious beliefs are concerned. So children who are being treated only by spiritual means in accordance with a recognized church or religious domination and is by an accredited practitioner will not be considered physical abuse. Does this mean that if we see a child in severe need of medical attention that we shouldn't tell someone or call someone? We absolutely should. But it probably just means that the case won't be substantiated, even though the parents will probably receive support, resources, and the child will be given more medical attention. So just because it's not going to be exactly classified under physical abuse or medical abuse doesn't mean that intervention isn't needed. Education neglect can occur when the parents or caregivers are failing to provide education for their child and should be reported by any mandated reporter. Also, truancy, children who are missing more than 5 days of school in a school year, that's an unexcused absence, is considered truancy. However, it is really up to the school and the school district on how they handle truancy. And all of them, according to the Georgia Department of Education, should have a plan in action that involves community partners and resources that engage the parent and help the child get to school. There's also a lot of requirements around homeschooling. And children, unfortunately, there's not as much enforcement around that. And if you want more information, you can go to www.responsiblehomeschooling.org. So even if we only see 1 or 2 indicators, they may be just the tip of the iceberg of the bigger part of the problem going on at home. In many situations, families need more resources or assistance. DFACS tries to help parents and caregivers help themselves to create safe and nurturing living environments for children. We shouldn't resort to calling DFACS only when we believe a child needs to be removed from the home, but as a measure to help connect the family with assistance. DFACS can help create a better living situation that enables the child to stay at home. So here we see inappropriate dress, and that's from older or just children taking care of themselves. Failure to thrive, consistent lack of supervision, unattended physical or medical needs. Some behaviors might be self-destructive, begging or stealing, extended stays at school, fatigue, listlessness because no one's putting the child to bed or helping them get up in the morning. Says there's no caretaker at home, and frequent tardy or absentness. So, sexual abuse. It can be a very difficult topic to discuss. It's difficult to discuss sex. It's difficult to discuss children and sex, and I feel like it's the most difficult to discuss child sexual abuse. But however, we must be open to discussing and understanding it in order to prevent it. In 2014, known cases of child sexual abuse accounted for 5% of the total known child maltreatment cases. Much research has been done to find a more accurate account of child sexual abuse victims. So experts have found that rates of child sexual abuse are much higher than reported. So as many as 1 in 10 children will be victims of child sexual abuse before their 18th birthday. So here are some of the facts that we see. Exploitation of a child for sexual gratification of adult or older child are considered abuse. So it is most commonly perpetrated by an individual known to the victim. So we need to get rid of stranger danger. It is usually people close to the family or the family themselves. And 1/3 of all sexual abuse is perpetrated by another child. So we need to be careful where we're having situations with a lot of older youth and younger youth. And also this definition includes this commercial sexual exploitation of children. So CSEC, there's a lot of great things going on in Georgia and regarding that as well. So I want to discuss the new Endangering a Child statute to the mandated reporter law. So sexual abuse definition includes consensual sexual acts when the sex acts are between minors if the individual is less than 14 years of age. However, it should not include individual consensual acts when the sex acts are between a minor and an adult who is no more than 4 years older than the minor. So I think this wording under the code is a little weird because it's not an adult if they're 4 years older. But let me just go into some examples to help further explain this. So any child who is 13 or under, that is considered sexual abuse if a child 14 or older is having sex with them, whether it's consensual or not. But if the child is 14 or older and the other child is within 4 years of them and is consensual, that will not be considered sexual abuse. However, we know in Georgia that the age of consent is 16. So while this is not considered sexual abuse by DFACS, it might be considered criminal by their parents or other people choosing to report it. So in that case, it would be reported as a criminal activity to 911 and law enforcement. So we kind of had two columns there in general. One is what's reportable to DFACS considered child maltreatment, and the other one is what is criminal. So those codes are kind of in conflict with each other. So a parent might choose to report a 17-year-old having sex with a 15-year-old, and that would be criminal, versus if that would not be considered child abuse and not reportable to DFACS. So that's kind of the difference there. And we also want to always keep in mind that direct physical contact with a child is not required to sexually abuse a child. Indecent exposure, showing pornography to a child, or exploiting a child on the internet are all examples of sexual abuse. So depending on your interaction with a child, you may see physical indicators, but many of us will only see behavioral indicators of sexual abuse. Some things we see children do, act out, or play with others can alarm us, but understanding healthy sexual development can accurately differentiate between normal sexual behavior and abnormal sexual behavior. So if you suspect that a child has been a victim of sexual abuse, it should be reported to DFACS. And hopefully DFACS will then report it or refer them to a child advocacy center where they can different services available to them. So some behavioral indicators will include inappropriate sex play or advanced sexual knowledge. So children, they do touch themselves. Their genitals are just the same to them as their ears, eyes, nose, hands. So really when we see that, we need to be having talks about what's private areas, what's not private areas. So age appropriate discussions. But if we see certain acts, certain sex acts, then we need to be alarmed about what this child is exposed to at home or what's going on. If they have an extreme of emotion suddenly, sexual abuse can be a more acute onset sometimes than the other types of abuse. So a lot of these can be sudden as well. So sudden difficulties in school, withdrawal or depression, excessive worry about siblings, difficulty with peer relationships, self-imposed social isolation, avoidance of physical contact, or even sudden massive weight changes, loss, or gain can be indicators of sexual abuse. And we also need to be watching out for disclosures or other things like that, especially in regards to sexual abuse. And we'll get into that in a couple slides. So emotional and physical abuse. So emotional abuse can include failure to provide psychological care, spousal abuse in the presence of a child. Georgia law is vague when it comes to mentioning or defining emotional abuse or neglect, but it can be very detrimental to the child and is usually an indicator of other forms of abuse. So while emotional abuse is not physical, it does have developmental consequences. A child that has experienced emotional abuse may struggle with speech disorders, lags in physical development, exhibit disruptive behavior, and more. So now we want to talk about types of disclosures. And if you're a mandated reporter, you're most likely in a role that you're interacting with children on a regular basis, and they probably have some kind of trust or rapport with you. So children often disclose indirectly or they test the water to gauge a reaction. It's important that we take all disclosures seriously, as children usually don't lie about this. We want to be careful not to promise to keep it a secret. And one caveat would be in older children acting out for attention. So sometimes they're bringing up past trauma. So we want to be able to tell whether this is past trauma they're talking about that we need to seek help for, or this is current trauma going on. And I wanted to make sure that you know that in your handout, we have a couple pages on handling disclosures. So if you guys can give me some feedback, what may be a reason that a child doesn't disclose? A lot of people feel like if it's a slightly older child, why didn't they tell someone? Why didn't they say something? And I think that's something that we need to get beyond. So what are some reasons that a child may choose not to disclose? So if the child was being threatened, fear the person will harm the family. Yeah, so fear that the parent will be mad at them or they'll hurt them worse, desire not to get their parents in trouble, fear of being removed from the home, a belief that it's okay for their parents to hurt them. This is what's normal. This is how I should be treated. They might fear of not being believed, shame or guilt that they deserve the behavior. Okay, so we want to respect the child's need for confidentiality. So just not involving anyone that doesn't need to be included, but letting the right people know. We want to limit the number of questions, avoid using leading questions, and don't try to get all the detail. We don't want to re-traumatize them. We want to really leave the investigative work to professionals and report disclosure immediately to a designated reporter or report it yourself. So here in the handouts, we have some pages on handling disclosures. So here are some facts, strategies to increase the likelihood of disclosure, types of disclosures, some of the hints we just saw on the slides, disguised disclosures. And then here I think is a really important one, and this is how to handle disclosures. So always letting the child know, I believe you. I'm so glad that you told me this. This must have been really hard for you. Asking open-ended questions or tell me more. What happened next? And as soon as you kind of have enough information or you feel like you might be traumatizing the child by asking anything else, go ahead and make that call to DFACS as soon as possible. And we really want to avoid leading questions or where did they touch you? What did they do? I think some of those can have a negative effect and children are really open to suggestion, but also some things not to say, such as, why didn't you stop him? So putting the blame back on the child, we really don't want to do anything like that. So now we're going to go into a little bit more about mandated reporting. So this includes most people who come into contact or are in direct contact with children professionally or through volunteering. New to the Georgia law are volunteers, for example, teenagers volunteers at summer camps are included, clergy. The only way that clergy have an exception is if it is within the confines of a confession that it is included within the doctrine of that church. Otherwise, clergy are required to be mandated reporters as well. And mandated reporters should know and follow the child abuse reporting protocols within their agencies. If your organization doesn't have one, please advocate for one so everyone can be on the same page and regarding, is it the individual making the report or a designated mandated reporter? How do we handle these things? Do we address it as an organization or what do we do next? So if you're reporting your suspicion of child maltreatment, it is assumed that you're doing so in good faith. You will not be liable if the report ends up unsubstantiated. Additionally, it is not your role to investigate or collect proof. So most reports will be based on suspicion or good faith. It is DFACS's job to ensure the safety of a child and to investigate suspected child maltreatment. By familiarizing yourself with your organization's reporting policy, there will be no doubt whether you have fulfilled your duties as a mandated reporter. If your organization doesn't have a policy, again, encourage them to create one. And if your organization has a designated mandated reporter, if you as an individual make that report to the designated reporter, you have fulfilled your obligation as a mandated reporter. It is 100% legal or binding by law that that designated reporter has to make a report. It's not up to their judgment. And what is not your role? It is not your role, again, to investigate information an individual or child has told you about their injuries. Go ahead and make that report as soon as you suspect it. Mandated reporters are allowed to report anonymously and maintain some confidentiality regarding their identity. Additionally, they can limit their liability by following the clearing procedures outlined by their organization. A new amendment to the law now provides criminal immunity for an individual who's acting in good faith is in possession of unlawful images and materials of a child, like child pornography. If you see someone have it and you collect that evidence, you are now given immunity if you turn those in within 72 hours to law enforcement. So let me just say that is to law enforcement to help with this criminal case. So in addition to calling law enforcement, you'll want to call DFACS as well. Don't assume that they're working together in collaboration. Make the call to both of them. So if you somehow come across photos, this law really helps people have immunity and helps police and law enforcement be able to investigate fully by providing them all the evidence they need. And it is also a misdemeanor for not reporting in up to 5 years in jail. So the way to make a report, and I think this is one of the better ways, is by calling 1-855-GA-CHILD. And this is required immediately, but at least within 24 hours. It is also helpful to know demographic information, caretakers, who's in the house, specific situations, risk factors, prior concerns, and child safety. So that's calling 1-855-GA-CHILD. It's 24/7, 7 days a week. There may be some situations where you need to call 911 as well. So 911 and DFACS may be necessary for both. Law enforcement is designed to respond within minutes, whereas DFACS might take a little bit longer to respond. So some situations where their danger is currently occurring, a serious unexplained injury, if you see a child left unattended anywhere, also if the parent is unconscious due to drugs or they're acting very bizarre, it might also be necessary to call 911 and calling DFACS. So this is just a little bit about the new response time. So when you call DFACS, if there's not enough information, it will be screened out. Otherwise, the call is assessed for severity of maltreatment or present danger. If they think that there is a lot of present danger, they'll give a response time of immediate, and then the next level would be 24 hours, and the next level would be 72. So this response time and the information is given to the county office. And that county office must respond within those time frames. So if it's immediately, a caseworker must go out right away. If they assign it the 24 one, a caseworker must go out in 24 hours and then 72 hours. Once they're in their home, they then assess it, whether it needs to be investigated or family support. So the main difference in this new way DFACS is handling things, it is the caseworker's eyes and ears that are determining whether it's investigated or assigned family support, as opposed to the old way, which it was the intake call center was deciding whether it's going to be screened in or screened out. And just to give you some more information about family support, so family support options are the same whether a case is substantiated or not. So whether they're just receiving family support or it was a substantiated case of maltreatment, the only difference is some is optional and some is required. They can include counseling, family and community supports, economic assistance referrals, and also evaluations. So now I wanted to talk about some electronic ways to report. So while it is still an option, it is not readily available online and it might be difficult to find and maneuver. So this way is when you email this email and you'll receive an automated response and you can request a form. So here is the form that you will be required to fill out. It gives you the options again right there. So here it outlines the options again for you. So here it asks you primary caretaker address, mother's name, demographic information, who else is in the home, children in the home. And then these are also kind of what we talked about before, specific concerns, circumstances, child functioning, And here it has where you can type in any extra information about that. And you will turn this in via email to this email address again. So that's something, if you have a designated mandated reporter, they can have that form on file and kind of fill it out together with you. Another option is by going online through the DFACS website. They require you to take a short training, and you will get a user ID and password. And that way, anytime you need to make a report, you use that login credentials, you're on file, and you make that report. So someone who is a designated mandated reporter or school social worker might also want to utilize this to make it faster, and if they're more comfortable with this. And again, the online form is exactly the same as the form that you fill out when you're doing the email form as well. So after the report is made, so DFACS must send confirmation notifications of the report to the mandated reporter within 24 hours. This is not always the case we have found, but that is what they try to do. Also, school personnel, there's specific codes saying they must receive it within 5 days. But whether you report anonymously or not, your identity would not be given to the family. And additionally, there is a potential that you will need to appear in court. And we want to encourage people to give their information. It just helps in investigation in cases. You have eyes and ears on these children more than the caseworkers or law enforcement, so they might need to call you for more information that was not included in the initial report. And just some final tips. It is not your role to investigate. Make the report. The burden is so low. You only need to suspect it. You don't have to have any proof. If you have an organization that has volunteers, always giving them the tools and training to handle disclosures and letting them know who to go to if they need to make a report or how to make it themselves. Discuss organizational leadership, who's responsible for making the report, and having a reporting protocol in place. Cooperating with law enforcement with any ongoing investigations. Always trust your gut instinct. If it doesn't feel right, you can always talk about it with your supervisor and encourage volunteers to do the same. And making a report even if there's already a case open. A lot of people think that, oh, if there's already a case open, someone knows about it. But again, they don't have their eyes and ears on the children like you do, especially if you interact with them on a daily basis. So following up and letting them know any subsequent incident that occurs. Okay. And all of these just kind of reiterate, we went over all of these updates as well. So are there any questions at this time? You should take questions, and then depending on how long you have, go into one or two scenarios. So either you can do it as a group as a whole, or you can break them up into groups, print off the scenarios, and let them discuss it as a group, and then get back to you. So when we're doing the practice scenarios, we always want to keep in mind, reporters should always consider the child's age. The younger the child, the more vulnerable. Children under the age of 3 or 4 are always at the highest risk when we're thinking about neglect and abuse, and children with types of disabilities. And when in doubt, make a report. Sometimes cases are open based on a pattern of behavior and not just a single report. So now I just wanted to briefly go through some of the practice scenarios that I like to use. So in your training manual, scenario A, I think the situation is based on a paternal grandmother whose son is currently away on active duty, and the daughter-in-law doesn't seem receptive to help. There's a lot of uncleanliness and disarray in the house, and there is a young toddler at home who's 15 months. And I like this scenario because you can change it up a lot. So the dad is away for 6 months. But what if the dad is coming back in 2 months? Do we still make that report, or do we provide other services? What if we're not concerned about, or there's no animals in the house, but we just see some ashtrays full of things? So I think this scenario is good because you can take in or out a lot of different situations and then see where the case goes from there. And I think just the complexity of it makes it a little bit more real life. Another scenario I like is practice scenario B. So Pam confides in you that she is really struggling with her toddler boy. She shares that she potty trained him last month, but he refuses to stop wetting the bed at night. Every morning when she wakes him, his bed is wet, and she's convinced that he is just trying to get her day off to a bad start. because he doesn't want to go to daycare. She's at her wit's end with her child and says she doesn't know where else to go. So she spanks him every morning, and it doesn't seem to change their behavior. So I think we see a lot of different things in this one that are risk factors or indicators, but I wouldn't necessarily report this one. It's really more this mom needs more support, education, then she needs to be reported. So the fact that she thinks she can potty train him in 1 month or that he's done. So that's developmental knowledge and realistic expectations of the child, especially since he's wetting at night. Maybe suggest pull-ups or, hey, my child, it took a long time for my child, especially my son. Here are some other things I tried. And just her perception that the child seems to hate her or if he's doing this on purpose. Again, that's just back to developmental knowledge of the child. And we can see where she's disciplining him inappropriately for the behavior of this child. So this is a lot of things going on that we can handle as community organizations or helpful organizations and not necessarily make a report. So here's the one where grandma is kind of a backup caregiver for a mom who's working. She's walking across a busy intersection with the children who are 8 years old and older, that she seems intoxicated. So I like the scenario because you can take it a lot of different ways. Like, what if you call the mom and she's able to come home right away and utilize other child care the next day? So there's a lot of situational things within this scenario that might change what you do. And lastly, this is about a home nurse who doesn't see a mom and an appropriate ability to care for her child who has type 1 diabetes. So I think this is good to use in kind of medical settings, or what do we do with parents that aren't willing or can't provide the appropriate medical attention to children. So those are the ones that I typically like to use. We have a lot more in your book as well. Also, I would suggest just kind of knowing what the organization is in advance. So you can either print off some more of the resources for them or be available afterwards to talk about things and get emails and to email them extra things if they need it. Also, some other questions I received: do we charge for these trainings? Is there a fee for these trainings? When you took the training of the trainers with us, we asked that you provide 3 free trainings, and it doesn't matter how many people are at each training, but just that you provided 3 free trainings within this calendar year, so August 2016 to August 2017, and then you submit to us these evaluations. So at this time, after the scenarios, I would ask everyone to complete the training evaluation, collect them, and then scan them in and email them to me or put them in the Dropbox. So that is kind of what we required of you, is those 3 free trainings and to receive all the evaluations from those so we can kind of keep track of those as well. Other questions that we had were around training fees, around advertising for trainings. So people might ask you, we do have it linked on our website, but you might want to just put out there to a community or offer to collaborating partner organization, hey, we have this training if you have any need for it. It's always good in person to have that interaction so that everyone in the staff is hearing the same message and is on the same page. And again, if they don't have an organizational protocol, we have a sample one in the Mandated Reporter Training Manual. It's in one of the appendix, and it is a long kind of template on language that they can include in their organization. So that's another resource that you can offer them. But when advertising, again, in that first page, it's page 3 of your training manual, we have an introduction. And that has a lot of great language that you can use when creating advertising flyers or anything like that on there. And if anyone wants to share anything that they've made to advertise it, just email it to me and I can put it on the Dropbox as well. I'll additionally be putting this webinar on the Dropbox so you can watch it again before you do your first training or anything like that. And of course, I'm so happy to take questions at any point throughout this. Again, we always have our contact information, so you can change this to yours at the last slide. So we are so happy to take questions, provide you with extra resources and material if you feel that's what you guys need or that's what your audience or target population needs. We're happy to do that based on requests and then share it with everyone as well. So thank you so much for joining us and for being trainers. And there's where you can contact us if you need anything else.